Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving straight into Maulana Maududi's incredibly deep commentary on Surah Al-Ahzab. Now, this is an absolutely fascinating text because it bridges intense, edge-of-your-seat military history with some profoundly deep social transformations in 7th century Arabia. We're essentially looking at a critical juncture in history, a moment where a community is pushed to the absolute brink of destruction, and we get to see how merely surviving that ordeal fundamentally shaped their laws, their families, and their entire society. To really wrap our heads around this commentary, we're going to follow its natural flow. We'll start with the historical background, move into the Battle of the Trench, look at the internal conflicts, and finish up with the key social reforms. So right off the bat, the very title of the Surah, Al-Ahzab, sets the stage for us. It translates to the Confederates or allied factions, and it refers to an unprecedented, massive alliance of Arabian tribes. These were groups that usually fought each other, but they actually set aside their own differences and united with a single devastating goal in mind, the complete and total elimination of the Muslim community in Medina. Okay, jumping into Section 1, the historical background and the road to the siege. Let's look at why this massive coalition actually came together. Maududi's analysis outlines a timeline that reads like a ticking time bomb. It all builds up following the pivotal battles of Badr in the 2nd year of Hijrah and Uhud in the 3rd. By the time we hit the 4th year, exiled leaders, people who had been expelled from Medina, were actively traveling all across the Arabian Peninsula, just aggressively rallying various tribes. This intense political maneuvering culminated in the 5th year of Hijrah. They organized a final decisive strike designed to literally wipe Medina off the map. And you have to understand, the scale of this threat was just staggering. The political landscape at the time was incredibly volatile, and Medina was practically surrounded. You had influential tribes like the Quraysh gathering forces in the south, and these powerful nomadic tribes like the Ghatafan mobilizing out in the east. Medina was essentially an island in a sea of hostility, and all of these massive forces were converging on it at exactly the same time. Which brings us to Section 2, the Battle of the Trench and this wildly new defensive strategy. So the Muslims are vastly outnumbered. They're facing a heavily armed force of over 10,000 men. Traditional open combat? Yeah, completely out of the question. So what do? They dig a massive trench across Medina's exposed northern border. The commentary points out that this was an entirely novel military tactic in Arabia at the time. It was a real game changer. It completely neutralized the enemy's cavalry and essentially forced this massive army into a frustrating stalemate. But here's the thing. A stalemate meant a siege. The defenders didn't just have to stare down this terrifying, unprecedented enemy force across a ditch. They had to endure freezing temperatures, absolutely harsh winter winds, and severe food shortages. Starvation was actively setting in. It was a grueling, drawn-out war of physical and psychological attrition. And that perfectly tees up Section 3, the internal conflicts. Because as bad as the outside was, the danger brewing inside the city walls was just as lethal. A huge portion of the analysis focuses on the psychological state of the munafiqin, which translates to the hypocrites. These were individuals living right there within Medina. They outwardly professed loyalty to the state, sure, but secretly, they harbored deep dissent. And during this terrifying siege, they didn't exactly step up to help defend the city. Instead, they used the crisis to sow doubt, make up completely fake excuses to abandon their posts, and just deliberately demoralize the entire community from within. And then, as if the panic created by the hypocrites wasn't enough, comes a totally devastating blow. The Jewish tribe of Banu Qurayza, who resided in the south of Medina and actually had a mutual defense treaty with the Muslims, broke that treaty. They secretly aligned with the Confederates. So suddenly that brilliant trench in the north? It wasn't enough. Medina's southern flank was completely exposed, effectively surrounding the city with enemies on all sides. There is this vividly descriptive verse from the surah that perfectly captures the sheer psychological terror of this exact moment. Betrayal from within, a massive army from without, starvation setting in. It describes a time when eyes shifted in fear, and it felt as though their hearts had literally reached their throats. It was the absolute rock-bottom climax of their despair. But here's the wildest part. According to the commentary, the climax of the battle didn't actually involve some massive, bloody clash of swords like you might expect. Rather, it ended with a fierce, miraculous windstorm. This severe weather event tore right through the Confederates' encampment across the trench. It uprooted their tents, blew out their fires, and just completely broke their resolve. Freezing and totally defeated by the elements, this massive coalition was forced to pack up and retreat. Just like that, the siege was broken. So they survived this absolute existential crisis. But we have to ask the vital question that the rest of the commentary addresses. How did this near disaster catalyze massive changes within their society? I mean, how does a community react after almost being entirely wiped out by internal betrayal and external force? You don't just go back to business as usual. This takes us into our final section, key social reforms. Let's look at how surviving the siege directly triggered a wave of strict social changes. One of the most profound shifts was the total dismantling of the pre-Islamic custom of adoption. So in the old system, an adopted son was legally treated exactly identical to a blood son. They took the father's name, they inherited wealth, and they carried all the exact same marriage taboos. But the new Islamic injunction stripped this legal fiction away entirely. It declared that adopted sons keep their biological father's names, and no biological taboos or inheritance rights are magically transferred over. Essentially, family ties were now strictly defined by reality and blood, not tradition. And this wasn't just left as some theoretical law on paper. It had to be practically demonstrated to break such a deeply entrenched taboo. Zayd bin Haritha was the Prophet's well-known adopted son. When Zayd's marriage to a woman named Zainab ended in divorce, the Prophet himself married his Zainab. By doing this, he practically demonstrated for everyone to see that an adopted son is not a blood son, and therefore the old taboos simply do not apply. But as you can imagine, this move caused a massive uproar. It provided fresh fuel for those hypocrites we talked about earlier to launch a vicious propaganda campaign against the Prophet. Because this marriage sparked such intense rumors and public harassment from the hypocrites, new social boundaries had to be drawn immediately. And this was the direct context for the introduction of the social injunctions of purdah, or veiling. These laws were introduced specifically to protect women from public harassment, to stop the rumor-mongering right in its tracks, and firmly secure the moral boundaries of the community against those internal agitators. By unequivocally stating that adopted sons are not true sons, the text brings the overarching theme of Surah Al-Ahzab into incredibly sharp focus. It is fundamentally about establishing unshakable truth and reality over traditional social fictions. Whether it's confronting the reality of enemies disguised as friends inside the city or dismantling completely fake familial ties, the society was actively being forced to face facts. So the crucial point we take away from this commentary is a really clear three-step progression. First, surviving an external threat of total annihilation naturally necessitated the second step, tightening internal security and purging treason. And that, in turn, required the third step, establishing strict, unambiguous social laws to solidify the community's identity and boundaries. It's like a giant puzzle where everything is deeply connected. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought based on Maudud's analysis of this incredible moment in history. When a community barely survives total annihilation, are strict internal boundaries and rigid social reforms the inevitable mechanism required to ensure that such a near collapse never, ever happens again? It's a truly fascinating look at how extreme pressure forged a completely new societal structure. Thanks for joining me in breaking down this profound source text. See you next time.